So Erev Rosh Hashanah, which is very scary, just sort of like blasts and suddenly it's here and there's never enough time and blah blah. Worrying thing. I don't know if you know, but I now teach public speaking in 5 yeshivas. Which is sort of like grown it. I never thought I'd be doing this. I teach other stuff as well. I'm teaching in 5 yeshivas. So last year in 2 yeshivas in Far Rockaway, I organised, in order to motivate the boys, to make it important. I organised this competition between the 2 yeshivas I was teaching, and it was the first ever Greater New York Region inter-yeshiva speaking competition. It's very interesting. One of the boys, of course, as I tell all of them, it's actually very good. It keeps me going, because I'm now teaching about 200 boys or something, and I tell them the absolute currency of Drosh is stories, but you can't say the stories that are in the books. You can't say stories that are well known. So in order to be really interesting, you need to get a story which is,
You can make it up.
and you can't. It's got to be true. Or else something on it. Right? So how are you going to get a story? So I told them this week an interesting story is true story. North of South Africa on the west coast, there's a country called Namibia. During the First World War, there was a fellow there. It was in a boat, and it was torpedoed by the Germans, a German U-boat, and he was the only survivor. He managed to swim to the shore, which was apparently quite an Olympic task. Strong currents. Totally exhausted from the swim, climbs onto the beach and lies there, just literally being fried alive by the sun, which is about 2 or 3 times more powerful than a New York sun at the height of the summer. So in a very soon space of time, he was nearly dead. His eyes are all clogged up with something like mucus, which is coming out. Became aware from what he could still see through his eyes. There was 2 figures standing over him. So these 2 people were pygmies. So there are African tribes who are pygmies. Physiologically, they're different to other human beings, by the way, which is interesting. Like camels, they keep liquid in their buttocks because they live in that. So that's the way it is. There's a husband and a wife, and they were having a discussion. He later discovered they were having a discussion whether there was any point in trying to save him, because he was clearly on the point of death. The husband thought there was no point, but the wife had more rahmanas, as women do everywhere, and persuaded her husband to try and save him. So he's just lying there. I mean, there's no water. I'd say Namibia is basically one huge big desert. So he takes a spear, because there were gatherers, and the guy's lying there, and the guy starts stabbing the spear into the sand around about his head. And after a few noises, suddenly there's a chink. So the guy takes the spear, turns it into a spade, and he digs down to about 1.5 feet. And there's a large clam, large shellfish, Africa, big scale stuff. So he takes it out, and you've seen these things, right? It's a mollusk inside. So he takes the sharp end of the spear, and he cuts along it, opens it out, and this creature that lives inside the shell, one of the strange, amazing things of its biology or physiology is it turns salt water into pure water. So the temperature on that beach is horrific, but 1.5 feet or 2 feet under, it's like in a cooler. Because of course, when the tide comes in, it cools it off, it keeps it cool. So he pulls the fellow's head up, and he cuts it, and you've got a cup. It's in the shape of a cup, isn't it? A half cup, like a hand, like this. He pours this, which is about half a pint of water, into the guy's mouth, and then chink, and another one. So he did this about 7 or 8 times, about 4 pints of water into the guy, until he starts to rehydrate. When he's able to rehydrate, they take some of the water, they clear the mucus from the guy's eyes, and then he scoops out the little creature that's inside it. It's food, and he gives it to him. But that was the story. So I said to the boys, you can't say a story which is in the books, because everybody's read them, etc., etc. You heard from Pesach Kron, because you heard it from Pesach Kronis and YouTube or whatever. But where are you going to get this? And I said, you're very, very similar to the boys to that fellow on the beach. You're surrounded by them. Where are you going to get stories that nobody's ever heard before? From your family. Because almost every Jew is in the United States because their family fled here. And if you just dig a little bit, not too deep, you will find yourself surrounded by stories from your parents or your grandparents or great grandparents, and they might be in the family, and you know sometimes people just don't tell them until you say, tell me stories. I send the boys off to find me stories that we can use in building their droshes when I show them how to speak. So Emma says, one of the boys, it's a tremendous story, which I thought would be interesting to share with you. It's a true story. And the true story went like this. His great-grandparents, he told me, so he came with the raw story and we polished it anyway. The great-grandparents lived in Copenhagen. Copenhagen, of course, the capital of Denmark. 1930s. When of course, the Second World War started in 1939 and finishes in 1945, so we're talking 6 years or so. Germany invades Denmark, and if I remember rightly, the Danish forces collapsed after a week. I think France was 2 weeks. And it's on its border anyway, so it's not up to Germany. And that was that. So they capture Denmark. Of course, the Jews are in serious danger. Interestingly, as you probably know, that the Germans had the code word for the Holocaust. Do you know what it was? Nacht und Kniebel. Nacht und Kniebel. Nacht, as you know, Nacht is night, and Kniebel is fog. Now, of course, the common denominator between night and fog is that it is impenetrable. You can't see it. You can't see through it, rather. And that was the whole idea. They didn't say to the Jews, right, you're going to be shipped to concentration camps or to extermination camps and gassed. They said you're being taken from one place to the other. You're moving from the west, going to move you and resettle you in the east, which from a Jewish point of view made a lot of sense because the Russians kept us in the Pale of Settlement. So the Germans are just doing the same sort of thing. So they put them onto these cattle trucks when they got to Auschwitz. They didn't say strip because you're going to be gassed, strip because you're going to the showers, and that made sense. So Nacht und Kniebel. In fact, I don't know if you know, but there's a famous Jewish artist, can't remember his name, but he wrote a book, or maybe a series of books, cartoon books, called Maus, German for mouse, obviously. And in it, the SS, and their SS, the Germans, the Nazis, are portrayed as cats, like human form, but the cat's head. So, no, not Chagall. And the Jews are mice. Have you ever seen a cat killing a mouse? Capturing a mouse? Well, as we all know, cats kill mice, and people often have cats specifically to get rid of mice. So how do they kill them? Not immediately. They torture them first. I only saw this once, and I was a kid. It's really, really horrible. So there's the mouse. And so the cat jumped, caught the mouse with its claws, like this, and pulled it back towards it. And then it let go. Now the mouse is actually stunned and sort of like comatose for a while, and then it comes to life and tries to run away, so it runs away. And the cat goes and pulls it back again. And I think it did this 3 or 4 times. And then after the 4th time, it picks it up and bit it, but not to kill it, to hurt it, then let her go again. And it did this over and over again until eventually it tired of the thing and then it killed it. Cat's not nice. Anyway, certainly from a mouse's point of view. So basically, that's exactly what the Germans did with the Jews. They played with it as cat and mouse, which is why I used this theme. When they came to Denmark, of course, it's a little bit like, catch and release, catch and release. So it was gradual. So the Jews who were working for the government immediately fired. The Jews who had stores, shops, etc., then they lost the stores. And then it went on and on and on, progressive, cat and mouse. It came, this is his story, but his great-grandparents, it came to, it literally was there of Rosh Hashanah. Now, the interesting thing was, when the Germans invaded, the king of Denmark, his palace is in the middle of Copenhagen. And every morning he used to get his bike and cycle, because obviously the little road going around, or big road actually, and go around the palace for exercise. And the Danes thought it was very nice they could see the king every morning. The Germans passed the inevitable legislation that the Jews had to wear Stars of David, yellow stars. The day after they passed that legislation, and it was, a Jew would be shot if he didn't wear this identifying marker, the king of Denmark got on his bike and cycled round and round with a Star of David on it. He'd done the same thing.
Christian?
I think it was called Green Christian, yeah. Anyway, to cut a long story short, then of course the Nazis decided it was time to round up the Jews. the resistance, the Danish resistance, probably partly inspired by their king's example, heard about this and decided to save the Jews. So this fella, this boy explained to his great-grandmother and great-grandfather that it was Rosh Hashanah and the table was set like a Rosh Hashanah table with the white cloth and everything, the silver crosses, the best cutlery, the best crockery. And in the middle of the table there was, instead of a plastic dish there with nice things to eat, but they had a crystal dish, which was the Alta Bobbas. So it was like, been the family for a long time. And it was full of candies. So they're literally about to sit down in Rosh Hashanah and to eat the meal. And suddenly there was a urgent banging at the door. So they go and answer the door, and it was some of the non-Jewish Danish neighbours to say, "You've got to leave now, the Germans are coming in an hour, half an hour, whatever it was." Of course, it was a coordinated effort. So, the whole Jewish area, suddenly trucks would be coming, the Jews would be rounded up. So they just left their table and they grabbed their coats and they ran. Now, Denmark's on the coast in the Atlantic, just to the west of Germany. At the time, fishing probably still is a large part of the Danish economy. They took the Jews on fishing boats. Some of them had to, hide underneath the fish so that the Germans stopped them. And the fleet moved out as though they were going out, to fish the way they normally would do. Crossed the sound that separates I think it's 25 miles of water, that's right, between Sweden and Norway. And managed to get every single, I think it was almost, I'm not sure the exact figures, but almost effectively the entire Jewish population of Copenhagen were evacuated to Sweden and survived the war. Interesting. After the war, so that's 60 years later, the astonishing thing, and this is the astonishing thing of the story to my mind, is when the family came back. Well, when they came back, first of all, what happened to Jews' houses who were all taken away to be killed? So people had taken the houses. When they came to the house, when his great Alta Boba and Alta Zeta came to the house, then in actual fact the house was precisely, nobody was there. It was precisely the way they'd left it. The white tablecloth. All the food probably turned to dust or turned to, but the plates were untouched. The silver cross was untouched. This is astonishing. In time of wartime, silver cross, it's worth money. Nobody touched, not one of the Danish Goyim spoiled the house. And there in the middle was the crystal dish. And
60 years later.
yeah. And there's 6 years later. And the astonishing thing, the boy, I had sort of tipped him off on that. I think he was probably the best, or certainly one of the best speakers. And I'd set it up, so there was a chair beside him, there was a bag, and then he opened the bag, and this is the crystal dish. Wow. But obviously not all stories have quite that ending. And it's
Surprising the Germans didn't.
Sorry?
Surprising the Germans didn't go into the house.
Oh yeah, maybe I don't know. Amazing. Maybe it was just that house. I don't know. Maybe not. Amazing stuff. Incidentally, I can't resist telling another story, which is certain similarity. Before I moved to America, as you may know, I was the official campus rabbi for the 14 universities of the northwest of England. So I looked after 3,000 Jewish students every year for 25 years, which is a big squish. And once I went into Hill House on Wednesday afternoon. Wednesday was the day they all gathered. It was a half-day university, Manchester. And there was a whole table, and there was great excitement going on at the table. And I went over, and one of the boys, he was telling his story as what's going on. So this boy was working for one of the major accountancy firms in England. I think it's actually an international firm. I won't say which one, saying we're being videoed. Well, I'm videoing. But anyway, so basically he got a job with this big, well-known accountancy firm, which was astonishing because they never employed Jews. But that was against the law in England, but there's ways of getting around the law. Anyway, he got a job with KPMG, and nobody could believe that they were actually, whatever the firm was called. Actually, me not in that firm. But anyway, it was a big international, like KPMG, who are obviously not guilty of this. Anyway, so basically what happened was that not only they employed a Jew, but employed a Jew who wore one of these. So one of the guys passed the comment and said, you wait and see. After 6 months, you'll be toast. You'll be history. You know how it goes after 6 months in these big firms, then you get your 6 month review. Did you have one of those? Which must be terrifying. Anyway, so basically he's working there for 6 months. We kept in touch, so off he went, and that was very keen to see what happened. So after 6 months, Taka, it was time for his reviews. I don't know who the non-Jewish guy was, but email comes in, or whatever the message was, that, let's say, Wednesday morning at 10 o'clock, he's got to go and see Mr. McDonald. And so he's very nervous, because he's remembering exactly that sort of story from 6 months before, when the guy said, yeah, they're just checking the box, they employed Jews, and then, see, we employed a guy, go on. Where is he? No, it didn't work out, and off his history. So he turns up to the office of one of the senior partners, and there's a secretary there. And so the secretary says, how can I help you? I've got an appointment with Mr. McDonald, 10 o'clock, your name code. Okay. Please have a seat. Sits down, picks up the phone, dials the extension. Yes, okay, fine. He'll be with you shortly. Are you familiar with the phrase, he'll be with you shortly? How many hours and days have you spent twiddling your thumbs when somebody says, I'll be with you shortly? Okay, fine. So Taka, after 10 minutes, phone rings. She says, okay, Mr. McDonald can see now, so she takes him in. Fine. Closes the door behind him, and there's this guy sitting behind an incredible, fabulous, desk, wooden, walnut, whatever it was, expensive desk. And he's got a file, and he's looking at this file here. And he didn't even look up, and he said, take a seat. So he sort of like toddles over, and he's got a little file, with all the projects he's been working on, in case he has some questions. And of course, so they're both they've both got files. So he finishes reading this file, and he closes it, and there's the fellow's name there. Right? So he closes it, and he says, how long have you been with us? Which is a ridiculous question, as it's the 6-month review, right? And at this point, he's thinking of the cat and mouse thing, right? There's this, how long? The American answer is duh, 6 months. Okay, 6 months. Mm-hmm. Next question. And how do you think you've done? This is tricky, right? What are you supposed to say? Oh, fabulous, right? Balgaiva, fine. Or, not too bad. Not to scratch, fine. Okay. He wasn't sure how to do it, so he said, honestly think I've done well. That's nice. Honestly think I've done well. Okay. Mm-hmm. So you look at this pen again. What's that thing in your head? He says to the fellow. So he says, it's called a yarmulke. It's my yarmulke. I wear it, every day. Why do you wear it every day? He said, I'm an Orthodox Jew, and religious Orthodox Jews, we have to cover our head. We wear these every day. Have you had any critical comments from any of the clients? No? Have you had any critical comments from any of your co-workers? No. And the non-Jewish guy said, good, well, if you get any, let me know and I'll start wearing one. Wow. Just by the by, Ramatasiel says, Ramatasiel Solomon says in his Sefer in the Mem Kenyonim, that I think I mentioned this not too long ago, that after the 10 Makkahs in Mitzrayim, there was another important limud that Klal Yisrael had to understand, and that was that they had to go and they had to knock on the doors of all the Egyptian neighbours and say, please could we have your gold and silver? If you didn't know the story, what would you expect the reaction was from the Egyptians when a Jew says, can I have your money, can I have your gold and silver? A bit like, if not, certainly not in Copenhagen, but in the other places like Poland and various places when the Jews came back, they didn't gas you, boom, and slam the door. That's, I think, what you would normally and reasonably expect the reaction from the Egyptians to be.
They're still alive.
What? Oh, no, but I mean, they must hate them. These guys were the slaves.
Polish.
Yeah.
They're still alive.
But the Egyptians, what they're going to say is, you've destroyed our gods. All the gods were destroyed, 10th of each god in each Makkah. You've destroyed our society. You've destroyed our self-respect. You've destroyed our economy. And you want money? Boom! But of course, incredibly, inexplicably, they gave them gold and silver. So Ramatasiel says a very interesting thing. He says because what they had to realize was the reaction of the non-Jewish world to us is completely in Hashem's hands. Here we had to go back to the Danish story. Here we have the Danish story where the Germans, these German non-Jews, want more than anything else in the world to passionately eradicate and destroy the Jews. These Danish non-Jews are moist and nefesh, as they say, in order to save every single Jew. It all depends on Hashem. And obviously at this time, if I was to ask you the rhetorical question of, do you think anti-Semitism is diminishing or expanding? I think there's going to be unanimity of answer to that one, yes. So simply, I mean, if that's happening, it's because Hashem's letting it happen. If He's letting it happen, it's a message. Did you? Sure. But both are very nice. Both are stories with, what's the bit of the joke that makes you laugh? What's it called? The punchline, yeah? And a punchline is often one of the things that makes you laugh is the unexpected. But the nice thing that why these stories work and why they really are appealing is because it's the unexpected. But not all stories have a nice, happy, unexpected ending. So we talked last week about that there is absolutely nothing you can do, absolutely nothing any Jew could have done that can't demand Hashem's forgiveness. If you do tshuva properly, no matter whether, as the Mesilas Yesharim says, it was murder or it was adultery, rather serious things, but that can be forgiven as well. But all that works because Hashem is Avinu Malkeinu and He can do everything. However, in Hilchos Tshuva, the Rambam in Perek Beis in Halacha Tes, it says, Ein hatshuva v'lo yom kippurim mechaprim ela al haveros sheben adam l'mokum. It only works for averos that you did in this process when you've offended, or hurt's the wrong word, but you've offended God, or you've contravened what God's told you to do. You ate something you shouldn't eat, or you've had a illicit sexual affair. But sins between other people, and his list is interesting. You hit somebody, you curse somebody, or you mug them, etc. And it's not forgiven ever. You've got to appease the fellow, you've got to get his forgiveness, and of course you've got to put right as much as it's possible, as I think we said last week, what you've done wrong, right? And you so if you stole $1,000 from the guy, in fact, when I went to see Shiva this morning, we found a check on the floor. It was from some fellow, turned out to be for his son, was for $1,000, and it was co-signed in the back. So anybody could have, so if I had stolen that, and then I'd feel very bad, tomorrow, Erev Rosh Hashanah, or 2 days time of Rosh Hashanah, and then I go to the fellow and I say, I'm really sorry. I hope you forgive me. It was me, but please, we're struggling to pay the mortgage and everything like that. Please forgive me. And he says, okay, just give me back the check. He says, oh, no, I don't want to give you back the check. No, that's not. You've got to make right as much as you make right, and we talked about that just last week. Even though you give them the money that you take it. It says so. But still, you have to make sure that you got to appease him, make him want to forgive you, and even if the only thing you did to offend your fellow human being was with words, that's the bit I find interesting, because as we all know, words can be profoundly hurtful. And words can be, that's how you revive somebody by rapping, which the Gemara says, it'd be preferable to burn yourself alive than embarrass somebody in public. So then it's still important to appease the fellow with Vagaboy, but add Shemachli, and be a nunnik until he forgives you. So listen to this. If your friend doesn't want to forgive you, maybe so you bring 3 of his friends. Alright, so 3 witnesses, and you say to him in front of 3 of his friends, I'm really, really sorry. Right, so it was you, Chas Hashem, and these are 3 of your friends, and I say, I'm really, really, really sorry. I'm really pressed hard, and I'm really sorry. Of course, I've given you about $1,000. Maybe and that doesn't work. Bring another 3. And then another 3 set of your friends. And but if after 3 times he's still refusing to forgive you, or you're still refusing to forgive me, you're done. And here's the lotion of the Rambam. And the person who's not forgiving, he's the chayta. Okay? I'll pause there. How does that strike you?
A bit rough.
Why is it a bit rough?
He was the victim.
He was the victim. Right. Now, this is a very difficult shear. Remember, two types of Averas. Erev Rosh Hashanah, Hashem can only help you. That's the way He set up the world, what you've done to Him. But you and I know, and I hope this doesn't apply to you personally, but you'll certainly know people this applies to, that people sometimes have been hurt so badly and so terribly that
There's often irreparable damage.
it's say it again.
There's often
Irreparable damage, right? Okay.
Like
Being who-
a child.
Okay, exactly. Im hu rabbi, and if it's your rabbi, you've got to go and ask his forgiveness 1,000 times, not 3 times. Okay. The Moshe Sternberg here immediately jumps in there, and he says that the next halakha is going to say that if you don't forgive somebody, then you're being cruel. So how could you imagine a Rov, one of the big Rabbonim, would say to his chaver, no, or to his Talmud, no, 100 times. It's in the Sakazorians. But he says, interestingly, he brings a Rambam into this to say, I feel a midas another in can mochel b'hitzi shemra, does b'hitzi shemra, etc. And then he brings the Rambam that says that your Rosh Hashiva may calculate, your Rov may calculate that you have somebody, one of the boys misbehaved in class today, so I threw him out. So he comes down and goes, are you Michael Rebbe? He said, no. Why? You don't look as though you are sorry. He's got a big smile on his face. You should come and really looking sorry. Anyway, so of course I forgive him in the end because I'm a tzaddik. But anyway, but you get the idea. So it might be that your Rosh Hashiva's calculation is that you need the big shock. Did I ever tell you about when I was engaged at Yeshiva, Ramat Sion, Solomon was the junior mashgiach. The senior mashgiach was somebody called Ramesh Schwab. Ramesh Schwab was the brother of Reb Shimon Schwab. And I was in his shir when I first went to Yeshiva. He gave second shir, went into second shir. And he was a remarkable person. He was the Talmud of Rabbi Yerucham. So once, I've written about this at least in one of my books. So once there was a boy who'd done something really, really bad, and he was thrown out of yeshiva. I have a mechutin who was thrown out of Gateshead. And he told me he was thrown out of Gateshead. I mean, the same yeshiva as me. My mechutin, who's a fabulous person, a serious Talmud Chacham, and I love the man. Anyway, so basically, when somebody tells you something like that, what goes through your mind?
What do you do?
What do you do, right? What do you do? I have to imagine something really dramatic. So I think after, so our kids have been married for how long? I don't know. Long time. So I've got my oldest granddaughter is 13, so they've been married for 15 years. For 15 years, I have been, we've been together. Just like, nothing. The weather is not. Recently, I managed to. One day, I was waiting for something really dramatic. No, I came up with something really pathetic. He was sent home for a little while. So fine. Anyway, so there's a boy who was thrown out of yeshiva. So he brings the boy to his house and he gives him a floor, etc., etc. He says, okay, you have to go. And there's another boy, an older bocha sitting there. You have to go and pack. And this bocha here, this older bocha, is going to take you to the train station, which is only about 15-20 minutes away in Newcastle upon Tyne. And he'll get a taxi and he'll bring you there. The guy's crying and he's begging. He's like, go! No. So the fellow, he says, you wait behind. So off the boy goes to pack and he says to the older bocha, he says, right, meet me on that one. Almost ask him. Okay, sorry, can't help you. Anyway, so this shows this is a real share. Anyway, so basically, so the fellow is begging, and nothing's going to work. And there's telephone calls going on, nothing's going to work. Okay, fine. So basically, he tells the older boy, take him to the train station, and as soon as you get to the train station, persuade him that you should come back and ask for a second chance. Okay, fine. So off the fellow goes, he picks him up, they get in a taxi, and they're going towards Newcastle train station, and he says, I'm sure if you come back and ask for Moshe, he'll forgive you. He'll give you another chance. I mean, sure, absolutely. Tell the taxi driver, turn around. Taxi driver turns around. He says, you go in, I'll wait in the taxi. And so in he goes, he knocks on the door, there's Ramoshe. Ramoshe takes him in. What are you doing here? He says, please give me another chance. Absolutely not! I told you to go back to London where you belong. Anyway, so he goes back and the boy, the Bocher comes in and he said, take him back. Persuade him on the way to come back. That's another time.
Cat and mouse.
Yes, cat and mouse is right. And then so basically he, although that cat and mouse to kill him, this was to save the guy. Sends him. I think it was a third, whatever. It was a number of times, and then eventually said, "Okay." So the whole thing was a setup. Because Ramon Schwab knew or felt he knew the boy well enough that because it's so easy to say sorry, but do you really mean it? Do you? He wanted to get the boy to the point where he really meant it. So it might be, as the Rambam says, okay. But again, as you cleverly point out, this is painful because what if something is really unforgivable, something really terrible happened to you? And here the Rambam says, that's it. 3 times, and then the Avera becomes yours because you can't forgive them. Not only are you therefore the victim, but you now have which must have been awful, but you also have the penalty of being now the perpetrator, victim and perpetrator.
So nothing is unforgivable.
Well, pardon. Oh, why do you say that?
Because at some point he said that you're supposed to forgive him, because if not, you're right there.
Rega. Okay, so when I read this the first time, I was extremely upset. Because I thought about this, and because I come across many people. There was a girl, used to teach in a seminary in Manchester, and there was a lot of the girls came from New York and from Borough Park. There was one girl there, Neva, if I remember the story correctly, and the mother must have been not well, but basically the mother used to lock her children in their dressing gowns, or in their pyjamas, out on the fire escape all night during the winter. Anyway, every night if they did something wrong, that was the punishment. Now, you and I know how cold it gets in New York in winter. I mean, they're going to die. Anyway, eventually, I don't know how long this went on, but people understood and they got in touch with social services and child protection, etc. And these children were taken away. I can only assume the mum was very not well. And other family members or other people brought the kids up. This girl, it was her wedding. Now, she hadn't seen her mother for something like 16, 17 years. So the mother was actually invited to the wedding, and she hadn't seen her mother there. And some, I want to use the word do-gooder, I don't mean it pejoratively, but somebody probably thought it would be the right thing to do for the mother to sit next to her daughter, the Kala, on a wedding day which under normal circumstances is what should happen. And so somebody whispered, "Your mother's here, can she sit beside you?" So she paused and she thought, yes. So the mother came and gave a very weak smile. I mean, I'm hopeful that the lady was just not well and she's now, at that stage, was cured. Gives a very weak smile to the daughter. The daughter gives a weak smile back and she sits beside her. And she was able to tolerate her mother being there for about 15, 20 seconds. And then she started to shake. Tears, she got all made up to make her, on her wedding day to look as beautiful as possible. Tears streaming down her cheek. And they had to remove the mother. Now, are you honestly telling me, is the Rambam actually saying that this girl who could not bring herself to forgive her mother, and it wasn't 3 times in verbatim, but in a case like that, are you honestly telling me that she becomes not only the victim but the perpetrator as well?
There's no contrition there.
Oh, I think so. But I mean, okay, so imagine, this is a horrible story, but one of my...
But imagine the mother would ask for Mechila in Belief Shalom. In other words, is asking Mechila where you actually have to break through the other person's heart?
Yeah, in this case, I'm not so sure. It's not a very good moshel, but I'll give you one.
Didn't it start with the father and son that haven't spoken to each other, and you drove the guy?
Yeah.
Worked there.
It did.
Different case, though.
It's a different case. Okay, here's a more realistic case. I wrote, I had 2 Tekufas of writing for Hamadiyah. You probably know I write for Hamadiyah now, and there was a previous Tekufa before, and then my wife passed away. There was a couple of years I wasn't doing much writing. Anyway, so that previous in that previous Tekufa, I wrote a piece about kids going off the derech, which eventually turned into one of my books called On the Derech: Answers to Questions That Challenge Jewish Minds. But it started off as just an essay. And when I wrote this essay, I went into Hamadiyah and I got a phone call. I got a phone call from a lady, and she refused to give her name. You know it's serious when they refuse to give you a name. So she wanted to say, so Rabbi Rubin says, he talked about reasons for kids going off the derech. So if I remember rightly, in that article I wrote about kids coming from troubled backgrounds, kids not being able to ask questions in school, and there was another thing as well I wrote. What was the other thing? Can't remember. The troubled background is the one that I don't get, incidentally. Right? I mean, it's terrible, but there are lots of people who came from troubled backgrounds, including a guy called Avram. After all, his father tried to have him burned, and stuck in prison for 10 years and then burnt alive. And then Sarah and they all came from sort of not such easy backgrounds. Not easy, but I'm not saying. But clearly, there's lots of people who come from tough backgrounds and succeed. So that's what I didn't get. And then there is the other one was being rejected by communities and schools. Horrible. I hate this. Absolutely hate it. When the school will not take your kid. This breaks people's hearts. I set up an organisation, I don't know if you know about this. It's called Near Tomid. It's an organisation to support Bali Tshuva. Across the generations, that's to say from the first Tekufa of Bali Tshuva, which was after the 60 War, 1967, so some of them are great-grandparents already, all the way through. In my mind, I've got like 4 Tekufas of the 50 years of the Bali Tshuva movement. I was in the 3rd Tekufa, bit towards the end. So I've got Rabbanim and Rebbitzins. We have a website. We have a Facebook group. We have every 2 weeks we have a webinar from famous figures in the Kiruv world. Rabbi Tatz has signed up to this. He's a friend of mine. In fact, I think of any big name, and certainly the earlier generations, and they're signed up to this. And it's been very successful. When I do the live webinar, I did the first live webinar. Many people watched it before. But the webinar is at 2 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. So that means that it's at 7 o'clock UK time and 9 o'clock Israel time. And you can also see it in the morning. That's to cover, in the West Coast, to cover as much as possible. So it may not be ideal times. But on the next day, 460 people had watched this. Right. Which was, quite a chizuk. I can't remember what I'm telling that story. Mine's gone back. Anyway, so the story I was trying to tell you was the story of when I wrote this book, she phoned up and she wouldn't give her name. Oh, that was kids going off the derech, that's fine. So I talked about schools rejecting kids, because the second webinar we did, because we also set up groups, self-help groups of Bali Tshuva, who are able to meet maybe once a month and talk about the problems. And this was the second one, it wasn't me the second time, a Rebbitzin, a wonderful, super person, on the subject of what do you do if you can't get your kids into school, particularly Bali Tshuva. So the first thing we talked it over. I said, make sure to tell them that it's not something which is an indigenous problem to Bali Tshuva. It's not so bad, Baruch Hashem. We are so blessed here. It's not so bad where we live. In fact, I don't think it's bad at all. Lakewood's terrible. It's not terrible. Manchester's terrible. London is terrible. Anyway, so basically, just let them know that you can have the greatest yichus in the world from the most fabulous family. You're still not going to get your kid into school. They shouldn't. The only thing is that because they're Bali Tshuva, they don't have the family support network for people to rally around and saying there's nothing wrong. Right? They are the bad guys, so they feel it a lot more. But other people get this as well. So I talk about why kids getting off the derech. Kids because they can't get into schools. So if you're rejected by the Kehillah, I'm not surprised they reject the Kehillah. Or bad, difficult backgrounds. Or not being able to ask questions. So I wrote a book with 21 real questions asked of me by young people, and between you and I, a couple of Rabbonim who didn't have good answers. And that was that. So that went in the newspaper. A lady phones me up. She phones me up anonymously, and she said, Rabbi Rubenstein, I read your article, and you talked about 3 reasons for kids going off the derech. Yes. She said, there's a 4th reason you didn't mention. And she paused, and I said, oh, you mean molestation and abuse? And there was a big silence in the end. And she said, I'm a survivor. This girl, whose father is a Haredi, Hasidic Jew, somewhere in the New York area, raped her repeatedly as a girl. And she kept phoning me. And I said, so I'd said, I immediately said that she knew. I didn't think I could mention it in Hamadiyah, which actually is not right. But anyways, so I said, anyway, she used to keep phoning me. And then she phoned me once to say that her father and mother are coming to them for Sukkot. They live now in Israel. And she wanted to confront the father. Right? Because you were talking about what mother would not, right? And she said, what do you think? Actually, after the second phone call, I said, look, it's driving me nuts. I can't speak to you. I don't have your name, so I'll tell you what, I'm going to call you Rifki. She said, well, that actually is my name. So I don't know who else, the details, etc. So this extremely sweet lady, and she said she wanted to confront her father. What did I think? I said, look, I'm not an expert in this field by any matter of means, but I don't think it's a good idea. She said, why not? I said, because I think he'll deny it. I think he'll say that you're suffering from all sorts of mental illness, postpartum depression. So that's twisting the knife in the wound, makes it much worse. I said, but you know what? I'm not an expert, but I have a mechutin who is. It's actually my mechutin's brother, but we work on Russes together in Gateshead. Somebody called Rabbi Dr. Shimon Russell.
Oh.
So Rabbi Dr. Shimon Russell, who's now moved to Eretz Yisrael, is a delightful person apart from being related to me. He is, I mean, he's been a professional psychologist for a very long time. And I found out he had sadly lots of experience in this. And he said, I've got, and he mentioned whatever number of cases that I've dealt with exactly like this. And he said, of all the cases I've dealt with, whenever the girl confronted her father, he said she's gone mad, she's postpartum depression. Once a father fell on his knee and begged for forgiveness. So what do you do if this is the case? This case here, the girl, right? Let's say the mother had asked 3 times, but she can't. So let's read the next halakha. The next halakha is crucial. So you get the Rambam. The Rambam says, again, second, third time, Lo rotzai, if the person still doesn't accept your petition for forgiveness, you're done. Then finish. Leave him alone. And the person who won't forgive you, he's the bad guy. Next halakha, halacha yud. Also the adam liyasach zari v'lo yispanish. It's forbidden for a person to be an achzari, to be cruel. V'lo yispanish, not allow himself or herself to be appeased. But in the nature of a Jew should be that you easily forgive. The koshelich is hard for you to get angry. And when the person asks you should. Your Jewish nature should be that you're willing to forgive. So I chapped a chidush, I think, which I take with my role of the Gateshead Rabbi Racham Zichotzadik Livrocha, to make sure it was right. You see, because I think this is the context of the previous halach, and he said this is when is it that if you ask for forgiveness and the person doesn't forgive, and they ask a second time and you don't forgive, and the third time and you don't forgive, when is it that the avera becomes your avera? If it's bederach agzori, if it's that you're refusing to forgive because of cruelty or revenge. You want me to forgive you? Burn in hell! If that's the motivation, then that's when the avera becomes yours. But if you can't forgive because you can't forgive, because you were sexually abused by a father, or you've got a mother who locked you out in the fire and you fire escape and freezing cold nights, or a million horrible... I remember once I was at a student conference, going back to my student days, and there was a bunch of girls standing, and they were sort of like dressed like men and shaved hair. You can probably guess the lifestyle. Doc Marten boots, the whole thing. And one of them came over and started an argument with me. And I was absolutely the antithesis. I was the paradigm of a bad guy. It was A, male, B, an Orthodox Jew. It was a Jewish conference, right? And unorthodox, that's a rabbi.
You're wearing loafers, probably.
I never. Anyway, so basically, we started an argument, and she was full of all the propaganda and all the statistics and all the figures, most of which ends up with baloney. And we argued, I think, for about 3 hours till about 2 o'clock in the morning. And after that time, I think, if I remember rightly, I'd managed to establish myself in her mind as actually a Jew who's just concerned about another Jew. It was that time she told me, in actual fact, she'd been, as a little girl, regularly raped by an uncle. So I said to her, you do realise that in never allowing yourself to move on from this, you're effectively allowing your uncle to rape you every single day of your life. Are you not? I'd love to tell you that she's now a rebbe and married to a Kalom. I honestly don't know what happened to this lady. But in not allowing yourself to forgive, then the past becomes the present, and the pain of the past becomes the pain of the present. I was once on a TV show. It was a TV show I used to regularly appear on, a BBC national TV show, and it was called... I can't remember. But anyway, it was quite famous this day. It'll come to me in a second. So I used to be in the show. It was sort of like a religious magazine show, Sunday morning. And once it was I think I told this story once, the subject they wanted to discuss was the subject of forgiveness. So there was two speakers, myself and a lady. The lady's sister had been kidnapped by somebody called Fred and his wife Rosemary West, and they were serial killers, infamous serial killers in England. When he was finally discovered, he was in construction. So in the basement of his house was 30 young women buried there, concreted over. I won't get into the details of what they did to them before they killed them, but it was a bit cat and mouse stuff, as in the previous story. So not only we say generally the statistics show that it takes up to 5 years to go over the loss of somebody you love. Parent, that's a parent, but we all, as I've told you before, we all want our children to be sitting Shiva for us, do we not? FLP came, that's the way they wanted to be, and we wanted to be for our kids. Chas v'shalom, never the other way about. It's still difficult. It takes about 5 years to go for the loss of a parent. 5 years to go for the loss of a spouse. I think a child's probably longer. I don't know. Anyway, to cut a long story short, if you imagine that this woman, and she's dealing not just with the death of her sister, but the fact that she had been tortured and raped beforehand, probably several times, then, how do you deal with that? So this lady had gone, in the United States somewhere there is an annual conference for people who've lost a close relative to murder. So if you lost a mother, father, daughter, son, sister, brother, you can go to this conference. So she went there. And they got everything there, psychologists, psychiatrists, self-help groups, blah, blah, blah. And each story is worse than the last. I was once saying this year in Houston, Texas, and a woman came up to me and said her daughter was kidnapped by two guys who raped her and then chopped her with a samurai sword into pieces. So, anyway, this woman had gone to such a conference, and all the support you can have didn't work. She went back the second year, didn't work, but she'd just come back from her third year. And she said something on the thing that just made all the difference in the world. She said, forgiveness. Somebody said this in the session. Forgiveness means giving up the hope of a better past. Forgiveness means giving up the hope of a better past. Because when you think of something really, really upset you, really outraged you, it was so unfair that happened to you, isn't it the case that you go over it in your mind again and again and again, and then you're not letting go of the past, and the pain in the past becomes the pain in the present? If you're not forgiving, the Rambam's saying, if you're not forgiving out of cruelty, that's the problem. But if you're not forgiving because you're not forgiving, the Rambam's not saying that's the crime because of yours. Of course the crime doesn't become yours if you're not forgiving because you can't forgive. Some people suffer things that, as you say, is just unforgivable, that you just can't forgive. But you should want to. Not for them, not for the perpetrator, not the person that did the terrible things to you. And I'm not talking here about somebody stole your $1,000, right? That you can forgive. Trust me, it's not nice, but you can go over that. I'm talking about the sort of thing that is going to need maybe a lifetime's therapy and psychological intervention, the sort of thing that you don't want ever anybody to know happened to you. Somebody stole your $1,000, the danger is you're too busy telling people, yeah, you can deal with that. It's the things that you don't want to know about. And you should want to forgive them, not for them, but for you. Because more than you ever give somebody by forgiving them, you give to yourself by forgiving them. How do you do that? So in Rosh Hashanah, the Rambam can't help you if you've got a grudge against somebody. They came and asked you forgiveness and you can't forgive them. How do you do it? Well, the truth of the matter is, as I may have mentioned before, the higher the mountain you want to climb, the more help you need to get there. Maybe you can't forgive them, but maybe there is somebody who can help you to find a way to forgive them. So, if you're carrying a big burden, you need somebody to help take the weight off your shoulder. If there's somebody who's going to come to you Erev Rosh Hashanah, and I hope this doesn't apply to you, but you will know people it does apply to, and they want forgiven. And incidentally, I never, and as this TV show I get into trouble because I said never forgive somebody who doesn't want to be forgiven. And it was a million because they immediately phone in and stuff like that.
Christian thing.
No, it wasn't. It was a general
I
thing.
think that's a Christian
Yeah, but the Christian thing is right. It's totally a total distortion. Turn the other cheek, as you know, is the Gemara says that's the way of a tzaddik to turn the other cheek. But if you turn the other cheek, how many cheeks do you have? Right? There is a probability that if you forgive somebody who doesn't want to be forgiven, then all you're doing is inviting him to do the same thing to somebody else. Never forgive somebody who doesn't want to be forgiven. Right? Because then you're just giving him a license and a carte blanche to go and do it to somebody else. But more than you ever give to somebody by forgiving them, you give to yourself. And if you can't find a way, but this is Clownshaw. There is no Jew. When I was telling those boys, go and get me a story from your family, there is no, or very few Jews, if they don't dig down a little bit, will find incredible stories of their family. We have survived crusade and inquisition and pogroms and even the Holocaust was still here. I never understood why Jews are normal. Quite seriously, Manchester University, remember I told you a story about this lovely, lovely, fabulous girl who's married one of my fabulous, fabulous boys, still very close to me. And basically the last year at university, her degree, she had a complete mental breakdown. So she went back to London, she recovered, came back, finished a degree, she's actually an academic, a superb person. I haven't seen them for a long time. But anyway, great people. She and her husband. And basically, what happened was when she was going to see the psychiatrist, her father came with her for the first time, and the psychiatrist sitting there, and they're sitting opposite him, and the psychiatrist explaining what's happened. She had this complete breakdown, and then and the father said, "And I was at Auschwitz. I was pulled from a pile of corpses by a British soldier, a Russian soldier. This soldier is dead, but I was alive, and I survived. And if I survived, that's because I have to be the best that I can be. I have to make the best life. And what's this breakdown, schmickdown? You should just not just got to get the degree, but the best degree." Blah, 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 blah. On he went ranted. And the psychiatrist, who uncharacteristically seemed to be very clever and normal, sent, that's on film, I'm really in trouble tonight, that's a major international accountancy firm, and all psychiatrists put him in trouble. But anyway, so basically said, okay, Mr. Pliny, we set aside stuff, he went in and he turned to the girl and said, "You don't need my help, he needs my help." Which is sadly true. But when you think about it, I have a picture in my mind of a little Polish Jew who goes into the marketplace in Warsaw one day at the time of Napoleon Bonaparte. He turns the corner, there's a group of Napoleon Bonaparte soldiers who see him, grab him, kick the living daylights out of him, leave him with bruised and nearly dead. This creates a neurosis within him, which he passes on to his son and his son and his son and his son, so that, 5 or 6 generations later, or whatever it is, I'm dealing with that child at university in Manchester in those days, or Liverpool, or maybe there. More than you ever give to somebody by forgiving them, you give to yourself. If you can't find a way to forgive somebody, find somebody who can help you. Tell them, find somebody you trust. This is upsetting me. This is happening. It's very. They might not say, go and forgive them, but it might help you because it might be too much at that time. But they might turn around and say, well, this is how you could work towards it. You start to heal. You start to let go of the past. And then you can come to Hashem and Baruch and forgive the people in Rosh Hashanah. And then ask Hashem to forgive you in Rosh Hashanah. And then you've been guaranteed a good year. The Slocha and Bracha V'Shalom K'Sivuk Simatova, a year full of Slocha, Parnasa, health, Nachas from the Kinderlach, and achievement in Aliyah in your Yiddishkeit.